So as Titans rookie minicamp is right around the corner, rookies will be in Nashville working at the facility for the first time. Tennessee awaits Joey Aguilar to arrive in Knoxville to get a chance to work with his new teammates for the first time since that transfer from UCLA. The Nico divorce. The dust has settled, and Adam Sparks of Knox News joins us now on 104.5 The Zone. So, Adam, I just think about sometimes an alternate universe where we are still talking about Nico Iamaleava and his year 2 leap as a starter in Tennessee's system. And for a while, Adam, every time you were on here, we were doing a Nico watch, a Nico check-in. And I just think about going back in time and telling myself on May 8th of 2024 that we'd be doing a Joey Aguilar watch, who at that point was the starting quarterback at Appalachian State.
Yeah, of all the things I thought I'd be doing this time of year, it would not be checking in on Appalachian State's final exam schedule to see when the quarterback is going to get in town. By the way, today is the last day of final exams at Appalachian State. If that confuses anyone, Joey Aguilar, the UCLA transfer, to my understanding, was enrolled in UCLA but was still taking where he had played the last 2 seasons, and he dropped his UCLA classes, kept his App State classes because those classes are about to end. And so then he can get to Tennessee about a month earlier. So Tennessee is waiting on their new quarterback to finish up and I guess graduate from App State. That would be next week if he goes to that ceremony and then get to Knoxville ASAP.
So how does that line up with the typical timeline then, Adam, of a player joining a new program out of the spring portal window, at least to the quarterback position, going back to Joe Milton in 2021 when he came over from Michigan? Is this a little bit later than you would like? Are they trying to make it to where it's earlier than normal? How does it stack up to the typical timeline for a player in that situation?
It's about the same. The summer program, as they would call it, for Tennessee starts June 1st. So that's essentially when all the players need to be back on campus, enrolled in their classes. Some of them take like a Maymester, but June 1st is when the team is back. They're working out. They're doing things on the field. They have 8 hours a week to do things with coaches during the summer. So you always have transfer portal. You almost always have transfer portal guys on campus by June 1st. Usually they get moved in and all that sometime in like mid to late May, and that's when Joe Milton would have been here. So this is similar, and so you could say Joe Milton that worked out okay. I mean, he was the starter for the beginning of the season. He wasn't awful. Hendon Hooker obviously passed him up that season, but this does happen. It's a pretty big transition because you have Joey Aguilar, a quarterback who was good at the mid-major level. You don't know if he can play at the SEC level or if he'll be over his head. He's got will be the third offense that he will be running in the last 5 months. So you got to do all that, and they just don't have much time for him to catch up, and they don't have a surefire starter if he's not ready because Jake Merklinger was moving along fine. His pace to be the backup this year, but if you're asking him to potentially be the starter, I mean, you're punching the gas at least a year ahead of his development.
So are you looking at this now, Adam Sparks of Knox News with us, as a battle between Joey Aguilar and Jake Merklinger? Are you looking at it as Joey Aguilar's to lose? How are you framing the quarterback battle in your mind well ahead of training camp?
Well, I think they'll lay it out as a 3-man race because George McIntyre will be in the mix. I just think they would prefer to redshirt George McIntyre. I mean, if they have to go to McIntyre, as a starter this season, that means you were 0 for 2 with these other 2 guys. So that could happen, but yeah, they would like it. Conceivably, it would be Aguilar or Merklinger. I think it'll be a legitimate competition. I mean, coaches always say it's open competition. They'll actually mean it here. It's just the difference of Aguilar, who's got a lot of experience, started 30-something games, versus Merklinger, who has barely played but has a 1-year head start in the system. So it's familiarity with the system versus experience playing college football. And so, You could say it's Aguilar's job to lose because obviously they went and got him to be the starter. If they thought Merklinger would be the starter, they wouldn't have gone after established starters. So they're bringing Aguilar in to start. But I wouldn't say it's his job to lose because if you played a game tomorrow, it's Merklinger's job because he already knows the system. He can run it. So Aguilar's got to play catch up in the system. But, whether or not he can do that, we'll see. But Merklinger has a head start with him there. If Aguilar can catch up in the system to him, then his experience probably wins out.
As the dust has settled on this, where are you on the current state of this roster? Understanding that they're still looking to add in certain spots out of the spring transfer portal, players that are still there. They do bring in Colton Hood, the cornerback out of Colorado. But, just how much does the omission of Nico Iamaleava, traded out for Joey Aguilar, adjust your frame of mind in terms of the talent profile of this Tennessee roster?
Well, I didn't think this was a playoff team, and I was on the record before Nico left of saying that. I thought this was probably a 9-3 type team. With Nico gone, I think then you're probably talking about 7-5 if you can't figure out the quarterback, or 8-4 if you can figure out the quarterback. And obviously, there's a lot of wiggle room within the schedule because it's not the hardest schedule in the world. But I think this just sort of amplifies the other issues on the roster. Because when you had Nico, you said, well, they have Nico. He's developing. He's got a ton of talent. They can utilize him to bring out the best in a Mike Matthews or Chris Brazel or Braylon Staley. He can sort of lift the rest of the offensive roster. With him gone, suddenly you see these warts even more on this roster. And it's not even necessarily warts in terms of talent. It's just depth. If they're playing one game, I don't hate the three wide receivers they'll have starting. But if you're playing, a few games, a full season, you could drop off a lot after the first three. And that's only if you're buying into their first three being good enough, their first three wide receivers. Offensive line, I could see working out, but there's just so many unproven on there. And then you flip the defensive side. I like the defense, again, for a game. I don't know that I like the defense for a season because one injury at linebacker and things drop off quickly. Another injury in the secondary, same story. I like the defensive line. It's not as deep as last year. So I think there's just a lot of depth issues on this team. Now, I will say Tennessee fans freak out about that, and I understand. But most programs in the country are going through that. We're so used to seeing teams that have solid backups, proven backups. Very few teams have backups anymore because those guys jumped into the portal.
Yeah, and you're coming off a playoff exit against the $20 million roster that wins the national championship in Ohio State. I know you wrote about this, Adam, on Knox News, the figure that is being thrown around regarding the Texas roster in that $35 million range. And then Danny White, who says at Big Orange Caravan that we are one of the haves, not the have-nots. Some Tennessee fans are certainly sitting around looking, waiting for the Vols to be mentioned in that top tier of what players are being paid on the roster. How would you just sum up right now where Tennessee currently stands in the rat race of NIL spending on the football roster specifically? Understanding revenue sharing is right around the corner.
Well, sort of the way that I put it in the story is that Texas and Ohio State and maybe Oregon and a few others, that's the elite upper class. Tennessee, I think, right now is the upper middle class. They are, relative to the rest of college football, they're top 10%. But if you're comparing them to Ohio State and Texas, they're behind. And, Danny White has done what he can do. He's generated a ton of money. The budget is skyrocketing, revenue skyrocketing. But it's just a little different deal when you're talking about NIL and rev share. Revenue sharing, when it comes in, we think it'll start out in the summer. You will have a cap on that of what you can spend, and then you've got to top that off with NIL. That's the difference. That people think revenue sharing, that salary cap coming in, lowers the ceiling, that everybody will be sort of on a level playing field. It doesn't. It just lifts the floor. It means there's a whole lot more buyers in the market. All these schools that, weren't competing for players. Now they have a cap, so they have some money, so they're buying now. But that doesn't mean that the ceiling comes down on spending. It means the ceiling still goes up. And Texas and Ohio State and Oregon and those schools, we're going to keep pushing up. Tennessee has done well with that. They've expanded their NIL budget. They're spending a lot more money, but I would say the others have accelerated it more so.
I feel like Danny White puts great value in being a well-rounded athletic department. I mean, all of these marks that Tennessee is achieving, right? The first-round picks and the NBA, WNBA, NFL, MLB drafts in one calendar year, the only school to make the playoff, make both Sweet 16s, the College World Series, all of these marks they're achieving as a well-rounded department, and I think Danny White puts value in that. But at some point, Adam, does that become an obstacle for Tennessee to make up some ground in football when you have other departments that are going all in with football with some sort of reckless abandon towards other sports?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I'm actually writing a piece along those lines, breaking down the numbers of that. I'll have that Knox News in a few days. It's the blessing of winning and everything could be a curse to Tennessee in the rev share era, because a lot of schools right now are trying to figure out how they're going to manage their salary cap, and then an extension of that is NIL. And they're trying to figure out what's our weak program that we can trim some of that payroll off of. And most schools have an obvious weak program. You may want women's basketball to win, but if it's hardly ever won in decades, you're not going to dump money into it to pay the players. You're instead going to divert that money to baseball or men's basketball or up the budget in football. Tennessee doesn't have one of those programs. I mean, baseball a few years ago would have been that program, but now they're the defending national champion. Lady Vols for the last 3 years, you could make an argument of that, but now they're picking up 5 stars and they're sort of loading up to try to make a run at what their brand has been historically. You can't trim off of football because that's your primary sport. As long as Rick Barnes is here, you're going to try to put together a national championship type roster. I mean, I've gotten this question a lot from Tennessee fans. Why can't Rick Barnes show Josh Heupel how to build a roster and go get players? Well, I think the answer is within the question. He went and got a lot of high-priced players at the same time that football could not land a few high-priced players. That's not a coincidence. This money is not endless, and if you're trimming from one place, you're going to put it on another, and that's just sort of the reality of it.
Adam Sparks, watch out for that article on Knox News. You can follow him on Twitter at Adam Sparks. The addition of Colton Hood, Adam, the cornerback out of Colorado. I'll be honest, I was looking at Tennessee and moves they could make at the wide receiver spot for what's a relatively thin position. Maybe some other areas. I guess corner didn't strike me as a huge position of need with Ricky Gibson remaining on the roster, despite the fact that Jermod McCoy is in the midst of this ACL rehab. But what did you make of the addition of Colton Hood from Colorado?
I mean, it's a good depth piece. It's a good insurance policy, because I know there's been a lot of optimism around Jermod McCoy, and he could be back really early in the season. They love him to be back for the Georgia game. But, asking a corner to play at a really high level coming off an ACL tear, you can be the fastest healer in the world. That's not a great position to just bounce back quickly from an ACL tear. So they did need some depth at corner. As much as they need wide receiver help and those sort of things in offense, they did go to the playoff last year because their defense was really, really good and their offense was good enough, at least by Josh Heupel standards. It was still really good. But, if they can be good in the secondary, if they can still have their pass rush, they can be good on the defensive line, they can win a lot of games because of defense. So they needed another depth piece there in the secondary, which could be thin if you have a couple more injuries. And Colton Hood is not he was in a rotation at Colorado. He wasn't starting, but he was in a rotation. I would say he would be the level of guy that Tennessee, would hope to recruit and develop. A probably like a 4-star level player, and if he can play to that in the SEC, then they got a good one.
Adam Sparks, our guest. You wrote about this as well on Knox News, the lack of a general manager for Tennessee's football roster, that 11 of 16 SEC programs have one in place. One notable of those 5 that don't is Georgia. Where are you right now, and how much feedback are you getting from Tennessee fans right now on the lack of a general manager, especially considering how the Nico fallout all came about?
Well, Tennessee fans want to understand what a GM would be, and that's a pretty good question because, like Jim Nagy at Oklahoma, he ran the Senior Bowl. He's at Oklahoma. I believe LSU's got one. Texas has one. Some of these have GMs that are legitimate GMs, at least close to like an NFL GM, where they are a partner with the head coach in building the roster. Sometimes these guys like answer to the president or chancellor rather than the head football coach. I think that could potentially be a problem if your head coach is making an enormous amount of money and they don't get to tell the GM how to build the roster that they have. We've seen that, issues like that in the NFL before. See Bill Parcells, right? But if you just have but if you have the other kind of GM, which most college GMs now are just player personnel guys who organize things, but then at the end of the day, they're walking into the coach's office and asking what to do. Hey, do you want this player or that player? Well, if you're paying a guy $800,000, $1 million, or whatever a year to just walk into the coach's office and ask him what he wants, what his decision is, why do you have that guy? It's just like an extra layer you don't need. I will say Tennessee probably need to move faster in the portal. And so one argument for a GM would be just a guy that can have things organized quicker. But sometimes those guys also slow things down. So as of right now, Tennessee doesn't have a GM, but they're going to reevaluate it once revenue sharing comes this summer and they see how things go from there.
If there is one player to be added in the portal, Adam, what position would you expect it's at?
Wide receiver is what they need. The problem is there's just not a lot of good options out there. I would say, the big mistake they made is they did not aggressively go get a wide receiver in the winter portal. If they had done that, they wouldn't have this urgency to go get one now because there's just not a lot of good options, and they're usually way overpriced in the spring portal. Teams are desperate. So I would say of the guys that Tennessee has looked at, probably 2 of them would even be to the level of that would help Tennessee immediately. That would be better than most of the guys they have. And they didn't get either one of those guys. And so really the rest of the options you have, you can bring them in, but you ask yourself the question, is this guy we're getting out of the portal better than the freshman we just had in spring practice? And if the answer is no, why are you adding him? Then you're just adding the guy to, be an insurance policy if you have a ton of injuries at the end of the year. By the way, these kids aren't stupid. Their agents aren't stupid either, at least not always. Usually they can see that and figure that out and say, you're just adding me to sit on the bench just in case of emergency. And so I'm not going to go there. I'll take some money elsewhere. And that's why it's hard to get a wide receiver.
Sure. Certainly makes it look like that 3 of Staley, Brazel, and Matthews will be locked in as Tennessee's primary trio at receiver next season. Adam, 4 Vols drafted a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, James Pierce Jr., Omar Norman-Lott, Dante Thornton, and Dylan Sampson. Of those 4, which will be the hardest to replace for Tennessee in 2025?
I think Joshua Josephs can replace Pierce to some extent. Omar Norman-Lott, they have low numbers, but they still have I guess it would be Omar Norman-Lott just because they do have some issues there of some depth and having a pass rushing interior guy. But really all those are sort of even. I mean, the obvious answer would be Dylan Sampson because he's the SEC Offensive Player of the Year. So maybe I should just say him because they're going to need somebody to help the quarterback this year. So I guess I'll go with Sampson. That being said, Josh Heupel's had all kinds of different running backs and duos and trios, and they've always produced. And so I actually think the running game is still going to be pretty solid. But I guess I'll go with Dylan Sampson just because with all the questions at quarterback, you'd have loved to have, a guy that you can count on to just pick up yards in any circumstance.
He is Adam Sparks of Knox News. Keep an eye out for his piece coming up on Tennessee and revenue sharing, as that seems to be right around the corner. We'll see if we get a ruling and approval from Judge Claudia Wilkin on that House settlement here in the coming days and how Tennessee will respond. Adam, thanks so much for the time, man. Always enjoy it.
Yep, have a good one.
Yes, sir. You too. At Adam Sparks is where you can follow him on Twitter. Great work covering the Tennessee Volunteers. This weekend is the, I guess we can't really say this about a baseball series, but the Adam Sparks Bowl of college baseball with Tennessee and Vanderbilt going head-to-head in Knoxville.
I do want to make one correction, though, for Adam and any other Tennessee fans when you're going to reference ASU. It is Appalachian State. It is Appalachian. Y'all got all kind of funny sayings around here. Y'all don't say Santa Fe. Y'all say Santa Fe or whatever the hell it is.
Milan.
It is Appalachian State. It ain't Appalachian, Appalachian, or anything else y'all could figure out to say. It is Appalachian.
You said ASU also.
Well, I just saw it in the chat. I didn't want to give the pronunciation away before my big build-up.
ASU for me is always Arizona State.
For sure.
Yeah.
I saw somebody in the chat do it, but I didn't want to give that away before my big build. This is show business. You know what I mean? I'm trying to add pomp and circumstance to what we're doing here.
We'll need a scouting report on the Sheep. Were you able to catch up with any of them?
I wasn't able to do a scouting report on them, but I'll do a scouting report on me looking at Zone TV. I look heavy as hell. I look like a damn love seat sitting in this recliner right now.
I disagree. I think it's a great angle.
If you think so.
We'll see how Zach Allen looks in that love seat coming up of Buddy Allen Carpet 1 as we are out here at Hermitage Golf Course for the Buddy Allen 9th Annual Tunnel to Towers Golf Tournament. An incredible cause that we're excited to tell you more about with Zach Allen next on 104.5 The Zone.